afternoon. Today we're going to be talking about sports betting on the ballot. As I am sure most of you watching will be aware, we have had a presidential election on Wednesday in the US. And while we're still waiting for an outcome on who will be the next president of the US, I know who everyone on this panel is putting their weight behind. What we do know is that we saw 5 states put gambling on the ballot, 3 of these looking specifically at sports betting. And while I imagine everyone watching today is primarily focused on iGaming, as it's mostly a European audience we have here, it's important, as Howard pointed out earlier in the week, to remember that all of the first steps towards iGaming in the US start with land-based. So any regulation or any change to the constitution around gaming is a positive step forward for iGaming. And the good news is that all of the states have voted overwhelmingly to move forward with these constitutional changes around gambling. And the states in question are South Dakota, Louisiana, and Maryland, all voting to legalize sports betting, while Colorado's increased the maximum bet you're allowed to place, and Nebraska has voted to open casinos full stop. So before we dive into what this means for regulated online gaming in the US, I would like to welcome my esteemed panelists. First, I am delighted to have and Sue has been in the industry since around 1995. First gaming events, an absolute trailblazer. So I'm delighted to have her with me. And Howard Glazer is the Global Head of Government Affairs at Scientific Games. And he has been a long-time advisor to the US political leaders, not this one that we have currently, and is a lawyer to trade, but don't hold either of those things against him. So I think what we're going to start with is we're going to ask Howard to give us a bit of a 101 on US politics, because voting in the US is not nearly as straightforward as it is somewhere like the UK. And I think many of us in Europe will not be clear on quite how complicated the ballots are and the voting system is. So Howard, can you set the scene and explain to us how it works when you go to vote in the US so that we've got a basic understanding?
Sure, let me do that. Let me just preface it by just saying, first, thanks for having us today. We appreciate it. And I know a lot of eyes are on the presidential election. Americans can't quite agree on who the president should be, but they agree on one thing: they like gaming. As you pointed out, the gaming referendums won in every state in the U.S., 5 or 6 states, depending how you count it. It was a clean sweep with a yes vote across the board. And it was true in all the regions of the U.S., whether you're in the West, North, South, East, blue states and games. It's one thing that everybody agrees on here. It is a complicated process. I don't want to overcomplicate it, but here's the basic things to understand about the U.S. system when it comes to the interplay with and potentially iGaming. It is primarily regulated by the states themselves. 50 states decide what kind of gaming they're going to have and how they're going to regulate it. And often a change to gaming, authorizing new gaming, sports betting or iGaming, may often require a constitutional change to the state constitution. Just like the United States, every country has a constitution, so does every state have its own constitution. That's a complicated process. First, the legislature has to propose a change to the Constitution and pass it themselves, the legislative body. Then it goes to the voters. That's what just happened this week. The voters vote whether to authorize or not. And then it'll go back to the legislature again, once the voters have authorized, to put the details in. So if a state this week said yes to sports betting, then what will happen is the legislature will come back and say, here's the tax rates, here's who's eligible, is it mobile or is it static, land-based? and those will play out over the course of this next year. But my expectation is that by the end of 2021, more than half of the U.S. states will have sports betting, and most of those will have mobile sports betting. And that is going to open a lot of gates toward iGaming, mobile casino gaming in the United States, only a handful of states now, that will unquestionably expand. You had voter support here, you've had legislative support, and we'll talk about some other things in this conversation that we think also have an impact. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah, so if people, obviously we know that people have voted when they've gone to vote for their presidential choice, and then there's numerous questions on the ballots depending on where you are, and some of those will be around the sports betting question. If it's not happening around that time, how do they make those constitutional changes? If you're saying you think, we'll have a lot more states with sports betting by the end of 2021, how do the states make those decisions to change that if it's not around an election?
Not all of them need to have a constitutional amendment, as I just talked about. Some of them may require local approvals, however. So, for example, here in Louisiana, where I live, to add more complication to it, the legislature authorized sports betting subject to the approval of every locality in the state, and there are 65 of them here in Louisiana. So everyone had to vote, and almost all of them did, to approve sports betting. Fortunately, that's not always the case in every state. Some states can simply pass a law authorizing sports betting because their constitution is a little bit broader. And so, it's a different process in every state. You have to keep an eye on it. The net result, though, is that, I think we have 16 states with mobile sports betting today. That number will go up in 2021. And I think iGaming will follow according to the state rules over the next, let's call it 18 to 36 months. You'll see an uptick in casino online gaming in these states as well.
So the outlook is positive, we think.
No, there's no question about it. I mean, it's a rarity for U.S. voters to agree on anything. But here's the thing. They like gaming. They like the options of gaming. You do everything else digitally right now, right? We all do it online. The one thing you can't do online in most states is iGaming or casino gaming. And that's even true in the same states where you can go to a casino. And of course, the casinos have changed their views too. The operators were of two minds once upon a time. Maybe the iGaming would cannibalize their business. They don't feel that way. I know for sure the industry, the casino operators, the industry companies that I work for, they are mobilizing to expand iGaming in the coming, short to medium term. And so that'll have an impact as well. And there's revenue there, of course, for the states. In the wake of the pandemic, the states are in a multi-billion-dollar deficit situation in the U.S. The costs of it and the economic downturn. And so they need revenue, and there's a lot of money. We think there's billions of dollars in revenues net to the states in the United States if they just turn on iGaming in a business they're already in.
And that's a big incentive at a time like this, I would imagine. Sue, let's come to you. Let's talk about South Dakota first.
Okay. Well, South Dakota is a lower population state, obviously, and they have one city, Deadwood, which many people know from a TV series, where the casinos are located. So they passed a ballot initiative that allows for sports betting now in those casinos there. And I think, but maybe even more importantly, is that the conventional wisdom is that this may also open up some doors for sports betting for some of the tribal casinos that are in South Dakota, which may be, even more significant, because by nature of the fact that in the past, most of the tribal casinos in the U.S. have been restricted to gambling just on their reservations or their reserves, and so they've been kind of locked out in many cases in the U.S. to do any kind of online gaming. And it is a situation where, for example, in Michigan, some of the tribes are now applying for commercial licenses from the state to be able to do it, because they all have their agreements with each other. So I think the takeaway from South Dakota will be the thing to watch in terms of what it means for the tribal casinos, because that could be very useful for them.
Yeah, that could be a real game changer actually in terms of the amount of licenses out there and the uptake and how quickly it moves through states.
Mm-hmm. And I think for your listeners, you know, there are a lot of partnerships that are going on now. People that are, you know, established sports book operators in other parts of the world are coming in and making, you know, some regional ones like in Colorado or some tribal casinos. So, you know, I think it might open up some partnership opportunities for some folks.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Actually, I think, you know, because obviously I think in Europe it's, you know, the new gold rush is as, you know, online gaming opens up and being a part of that. I think often there's lots of smaller states and smaller players, and people get very focused perhaps on the bigger partnerships and the bigger prizes, but forget just how big the US is, and actually that a small partnership in the States would be the equivalent to a very big partnership here in Europe.
And frankly, you know, with travel being so restricted, that the smaller regional casinos, when they are open, are able to cater to a local audience. So in some ways, they've been able to take more advantage of it than like Las Vegas or places that necessitate travel.
Yeah, and that's interesting because Howard, you're talking about, you know, originally a lot of the bigger casinos were really worried about cannibalization. This is slightly off topic. But do you think that they were moving towards, from that point of view, even being really moved them in that direction?
Well, look at the state, the most successful iGaming state in the United States is New Jersey, right? New Jersey is producing a tremendous amount of revenue. Before COVID, 25% of all of the casino revenues in New Jersey were from iGaming. That's a very big number, happened very quickly. Everybody sees it. Pennsylvania is heading in the same direction, a more recent gaming state. Those are really two big ones. And so, and at the same time, again, pre-COVID, the business on the brick and mortar was doing very well. So I think what we'll see is that both the state legislators understand that there's revenue there in a business they're already in. The casino operators understand that this is going to help both sides of their business. And we've had a pandemic, so everybody wants to have stability in revenue sources and the ability to play from home. And South Dakota is a good example of that, of the fact that that's a small, sparsely populated, conservative state, still votes for gaming because it's important to tourism, it's important to the economy. When you get to the Ohio's, when you get to the Illinois, when you get to the New Yorks, it'll be, the way will have already been paved by these smaller states like South Dakota.
Yeah, and I think that's also probably a good point, is for people who are worried that, like I say, you know, they've missed the gold rush. Is actually there's parts like Sue says out there with smaller casinos and in smaller states, but actually that might be a good way to prove yourself in the US by focusing on a smaller relationship and that you understand the market, you know what needs to be done, and having that proof of concept rather than just, you know, aiming for Everest first of all.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a good point. And I know of people who are from outside the U.S. have regulated sports books in other jurisdictions, want to come into the U.S. and that's what they're doing. They're looking at one partnership to kind of prove their mettle and also just to get a footprint here. So once they get that, they go through the licensing process, things like that, then it's a good opportunity for them to leverage it from there on.
All right. Okay, let's go to who wants to take Maryland?
Howard, you want to do that one?
Well, to say Maryland is one of the bigger states, right? This is a state on the East Coast. It's not one of the biggest states in the U.S., but it's a very highly populated state. There's a lot of gaming there already. It's very well established. What the referendum did, and it passed overwhelmingly, is allow for sports betting. This is a state where the legislature will come back and put the details in, including whether or not there is mobile gaming. And we believe that this is one state where you will see mobile gaming. As you have, they're very close to Pennsylvania on the border. They're close to New Jersey. And so in order to be competitive, and this is another factor, these states all want to be competitive with the state that's nearby them. They don't want their people going across the border and betting online because you're geo-fenced. And if you're on this side of the street, You can bet, you're on this side of the street, you can't bet. So they want to solve that problem. So I think Maryland, you'll be seeing in 2021, iGaming, sports betting will be on.
And I think the other thing about Maryland that's notable is, like DC, right next door, is that they have allowed for one of the stadiums to be able to become a licensed sportsbook operator. RFK Stadium is one of them, in addition to the land-based casinos and the tracks, the racetracks. So, I think we'll begin to see more and more of that as we go through. There are some other, Illinois has done that, DC has done that. So, that's, again, it's another partnership. For example, in DC, we've seen William Hill partner with the folks at Monumental with the stadium there. And so, I think it's not unusual to look at the venue owners, which in many cases are the teams themselves, not always, but in many cases. So those are another partnership opportunity there.
That's quite an exciting one then, especially. And in terms of timelines, and I know this might be a piece of string, what is the likely timeline then on the legislation going through? And if it's including things like MOBA, is that likely for it to take longer?
Well, I'll let Howard answer, but it's going to depend on the state for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the state. In my view, would be in Maryland. By June, they will have authorized sports betting, because that's when their legislative session runs. They have to make their budgets and pass their budgets, and that would include the revenue that they would expect to get toward the end of the fiscal year from sports betting. So I think by June, maybe even earlier, you'll have all these details in place, and that's true for any of these states that have to take the next step. And also, I think we'll see, we're talking about the referendum, that is the votes we had this week. Many other states will be looking at sports betting, mobile and otherwise, over the course of 2021, and some big states will be doing that.
I think the unknown on that is how COVID's going to affect the legislative process. I think we would have been farther along with getting additional states passed by the legislatures earlier this year had they not come to a screeching halt. So, either they're going to have to learn how to legislate via, virtual, like all the rest of us have. Yeah, exactly. And I think they're kind of reluctant to do that in many states. But, we can't go really another season with the legislative process shut down. I mean, as Howard said, they've got big budget holes they've got to fill, and they're looking for acceptable ways to do that. So, we'll have to see how that all sorts out. Most of those sessions start up again in January. So, we'll see, but hopefully they'll be able to actually get some work done this year.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that the tax would be a big driver in moving it forward.
Which is also the scary part for the industry, Well,
yeah, exactly. Where is that tax going to fall?
Yeah, it's got to be commercially viable from the operator's standpoint. Although look at Pennsylvania. I mean, they had some enormous tax rates in theirs, and for a while people were saying, oh, who's going to apply for those licenses? Well, probably every casino in Pennsylvania is doing that now.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. It's about, is the government just going to say, well, we know that you're going to apply for the licenses anyway, so we're going to go as high as we possibly can, or do they want to strike a balance that is commercially fair, whereby there's a good uptick in taxation, and then there's a fair fee and tax policy for the operators? But I think that remains to be seen, really. And then last but not least, we've got Louisiana. What are your thoughts on that, Sue?
Well, Louisiana is a sports crazy state, much of it college. So, I think that, again, the devil will be in the details as it gets punted back to the legislature to come up with all of the rules and regulations and tax rates and mobile or not and that sort of thing. Howard's living there. So he may have better insight as to what the process is.
And I would not expect mobile sports betting out of the gate here. It is a conservative state, even though they absolutely is right. It's sports heavy. Saints are here as well. And you have big casino operations on the Gulf Coast and a little bit in New Orleans and elsewhere around. But they are not likely to move toward I don't think this year. I think that'll be in the next phase. So, you know, for planning purposes, you're looking to do some business in the States, keep in mind you got a little bit of a runway here. And as you pointed out earlier, Shona, that's been some time probably to some relationships in a state where it could be a very good business down the road.
And Mississippi is right next door, and they've started out with no mobile. I keep hearing that they may come back and reevaluate that, because now they've learned that it's not going to hurt. So we'll see what happens. But again, as Howard alluded to earlier, probably the biggest issue among the United States various state legislatures is they look at what's going on next door. Except maybe in New York. I mean, for some reason the fact that they have all this bleeding over to New Jersey doesn't seem to have motivated them adequately yet. But most states in Missouri are pretty surrounded, or we're getting close to it. So, those are things they don't want to see, that leakage over across the rivers in our case.
Okay, and just before we wrap up, because I'm mindful of time. So while we don't yet have a presidential outcome, let's keep everything crossed for good news over the weekend. Just briefly, do we think that the outcome, whether it's Republican or Democrat in the White House, will that have any impact on sports betting and iGaming moving forward? Or do we think it makes very little difference because everything is done at a state level now?
Well, I think the one area where it does is in the Wire Act. I mean, we had previously a favorable opinion related to cross-border gaming. And then under this current administration, they reversed that. And so that kind of threw everything up in the air again. So I think the conventional wisdom is that if there is a President Biden, that might be reversed back to the favorable ruling again. So, but other than that, I think it may not make much difference.
Howard?
No, I think Suzanne is right, and that's a big deal. If the Biden administration takes a different position on the restrictions of what's called the Wire Act, which prevent interstate bets from being done online, that would change the game, and it would add rocket fuel to the iGaming industry. When you add up the voting that you saw here, the need for revenue, the interest by consumers in gaming, the move by the casino operators to say they're not worried about cannibalization, and then you layer on top of that a different approach on interstate gaming by a Biden Justice Department potentially, that is the moment when you're going to see a tipping point. It'll take a little while to play out, but the inevitability of online gaming in the U.S., I think, will be set at that point.
So that would be another huge positive of having Biden in the White House for us in the gaming industry, is potentially the opening up of interstate gaming. And that really would be the game changer that we've all been waiting for, I think.
Potentially. Hard to predict anything, but it certainly is an option that wasn't there previously if there's a Biden administration. And there's pros and cons with every administration for gaming, but that particular one is important to us.
Yeah, that would be very important. Well, let's end on a positive note and I very much hope that you guys get the result that I know we're all hoping for, and maybe that'll come in today, and if not tomorrow, and that you'll be able to celebrate some positive times ahead. I'd like to just thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and I'll hand over to Pierre now. Thank you.